Oh, I should put this on. Okay. It is time for us to start. If you have a book, page 16. Page 16. We're going to get started with a prayer, and then we'll dive into our lesson for the morning. See, my mic guys are Dave, and I think Brandon did have one. Did Brandon disappear? Yeah, he'll be back. So Dave, if you'll lead us in a prayer, then we'll jump into our discussion this morning.
Dear Lord, we are so grateful for the opportunity this morning to be able to gather together and be able to study your word and the book of Revelation, and help us open our minds and our hearts and fill us with wisdom and knowledge and understanding, and help us to see the things that you want us to see, to do the things that you want us to do, and to share the things that you want us to share. Help all of our hearts to glorify you in everything that we say, do, think, and feel. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. So you were asked, you had an assignment to read chapter 1 and to list the things that you found that were important to help us understand this book. You could tell that when I wrote this book, I had a smaller classroom in mind, because I'd love to just divide us all up into group projects and love to make you move around the room. I'm not going to do that, but I do want you to take a few minutes to, if you can, talk to people around you, preferably not in your house. Just share with each other some of the things you found. I'm going to give you a couple minutes. This is one of those times where you all get to talk. It's not on the camera. It's not on the microphone. So talk away, but what are some things? Just discuss, and then we'll have some discussion about that on a much larger scale. So feel free to turn around, feel free to talk a little bit, get to know your neighbor, and I'll give you about 3 or 4 minutes to do that. And if you've not, this also gives you the opportunity, if you've not done this, to read through chapter 1 and be prepared to discuss in a few minutes. So hence the purpose of the group project. Yeah, this is where I should hear a dull roar at least, and I hear a lot of silence. So look, see, Gina and Gina are getting together. I like that. You can get up and move. If you don't like the person you're sitting next to, you can move to the other side of the room to talk to somebody else. That's perfectly acceptable too, although we are going to judge you in the process of that. Is that Eric's wisdom? Eric has this look of fear on his face right now. What in the world? All right, that should at least get your appetite there. So, let's talk about maybe some of the things you talked about. In Revelation 1, as it kind of sets up, what are some things there that help us understand what this book is really about? So, raise your hand, share. I got 2 mics, Brandon and Dave. They'll bring you a mic, because remember, we've got people listening at home. We want them to be able to hear. So, what's some things that stick out to you? Because I heard talking, so unless you were talking about the weather or sports, there are some things you can share. So who's willing to start us off? Okay, Terry Reed, if somebody give him the mic.
talks about time is near, so it's a specific time.
Okay. Time is near, so we've got a specific time, and we could debate about what that may mean, but that's mentioned. Somebody else. Okay, Gina West, if you get a mic up here. Who else wants to go ahead and raise your hand? We'll get the second mic to you.
It's written to the 7 churches of Asia in an apocalyptic style.
Okay. It's written to the 7 churches of Asia, and we've talked a lot about how it's apocalyptic style. It is interesting, chapter 1 kind of introduces the 7 churches idea and some other things, and then you get to chapter 2, and it's like, oh, here's 7 churches, here's some letters to you. And that's why chapter 1 should be kind of read as a kind of an opening pages, kind of what's going on. So what else do we have here? Okay, Linda, if I get a mic to Miss Linda. There you go.
I thought about the fact that it says this is from Jesus.
Okay.
It's, this isn't John's idea.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic that this comes from Jesus. This is his message. What else? Okay, Miss Jeanette.
There's a description. That's the first time I've ever known that there was, a description of the Son of Man.
Okay.
Like the Son of Man.
Absolutely. There is this description of him, and what do you feel like when you read that description? What do you think about that description? What does it display maybe, or what does it project? Think of anything? It sounds kind of powerful to me.
Yeah. An idea of what he might look like,
Okay.
and we've never known that before.
Yeah.
In the Bible.
Now, I think it's very important to say this. Is that literal, the description? No. No, this is part of the apocalyptic style. We'll talk about that more today, but that's part of the apocalyptic style. We'll get Mike to Joe. That what's being described there is not so much, when you look there towards the end, that his feet are like furnished bronze refined in a fire, but rather it is this kind of outlandish description in a vision format to kind of say he's alive, he's ruling, he's conquering, he's powerful. That's what you would get from this, the way it's written, Joe.
Yeah, because later on he's depicted as a slain lamb.
Yeah.
And so, but one of the things that jumped out to me the first time ever in reading this was there's a bit of a resurrection that takes place here.
Okay.
John falls down as one dead, and the Lord touches him.
And then later calls him up into the heavens in chapter 4.
Yeah. So it's kind of a bit of a foreshadowing or something along those lines.
Yep, that's interesting as well. You mentioned the lion, that he pictures a lion. It's interesting in that scene when we get to that. It's about the scroll. Only the lion is, well, I said lion, you said lamb. Only the Lion of Judah is worthy to open it, and the Lion of Judah is not a lion at all. It's a lamb that has been slain. And so there's a lot of depictions. All of those images are intended to give you more feeling than a literal perception. So here it's power. And I'll say this, because I had this discussion with my daughter yesterday, my youngest. They covered parts of Revelation in one of their camps this summer. And she said, it's pretty crazy to think how heaven is a big cube. Now, that's based on the description at the end. I'm like, well, that's not really what it's saying there. Well, if you put like it's over 30 United States, and I said, but that's not really what it's saying. And this is really important. Like when you read the descriptions in chapters 21, 22, and we could debate what that refers to, but if it's heaven, that doesn't mean that the gates are literally going to be big pearls and that the streets are going to be made out of literal gold. It's not meant to be taken literal that way. It's just in these images, this is how the spiritual realm is revealed to us in a way hopefully we can comprehend. Because it is far more magnificent. I think that's the thing you understand. This image of Jesus, it's intended to encourage you to these people to show them the power of their Savior. But the reality is he's far more powerful than this vision's even revealing him. And so the city at the end is explained that way to reveal to you the beauty and the glory of that city. But the reality is once you enter the spiritual realm, it's far greater than even that can depict. That's how you have to view these images. And we'll talk a little bit more about some important things there. Those are all great things. We're going to get into today what I just call the 4 essentials of the book of Revelation. I wish I could take credit for this. This really goes back to a book by David Banning that he wrote for a high school class, and the way he presented this was really good. And what he did in that book, if you were to teach it, which I'm going to teach that book next quarter to our high school kids, if you were to teach that book, you would repeat these things every class. And we're going to do that too, because one of the things about this is it's going to remind us these 4 things are going to keep us focused on our study of Revelation with the right focus. That's so important as we go forward. So today, I've kind of been saying this for a couple of classes. Today's a really important class from that standpoint. So the first thing is, and you can find this stuff on page 17 to follow along. The first thing, and it's going to incorporate this, we're going to read the section that we just talked about in Revelation 1, is that Revelation has a special style. Now we call that style, and Gina mentioned this earlier, we call that style apocalyptic literature. And we've talked a lot about what that means, but we need to kind of think about what that means as we study things, okay? So one of the things I want to do first is I want us to get in and read this actual vision in chapter 1, verses 12 through 16. And I'm going to get a volunteer to do that, so I'm not doing all the talking this morning. So Revelation chapter 1, verses 12 through 16. Who's willing to read that for us? We'll get a mic to you. Okay, Brandon, you've got the mic, so why don't you read that, verses 12 through 16.
Then I turned to see the voice that spoke with me, and having turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of the 7 lampstands one like the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the feet, and girded about the chest with a golden band. His head and hair were like white wool, as white as snow, and his eyes like a flame of fire. His feet were like fine brass, as if refined in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. He had in his right hand 7 stars. Out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, and his countenance was like the sun shining in its strength.
All right, so let's talk about these visions, because there are going to be more visions like this. One of the things I'll do with the high school kids, can't do with you, there's too many of you, it take too long, is when we get to a vision like this, we'll take about 10 minutes and we'll have the wall covered in poster board and they'll draw the vision as they see it in their mind. And I want you to think about that. One of the things about those visions is when you draw that vision and you start putting this together, the white hair, the fiery eyes, the sword coming out of the mouth, and you start processing that vision, it kind of comes to life for you, right? I think one of the dangers before we get into this vision and how you feel about it is, one of the dangers when we get to these visions is we want to overanalyze all of this. We want to go, well, what does it mean that his hair is white like wool? And what does it mean that the eyes are like fire? And what does it mean that his feet are like bronze? And if you want to do that on your own time, that's your own time. We're not going to do that in here. Because the problem with that is that's not how it's intended to be read, to micromanage every detail of the vision. The real point of this is to look at this and go, wow. That's the point. I'm a Marvel fan. You may not be a Marvel fan. We love to watch the Marvel movies. Some of you don't know what I'm talking about. That's fine. Some of you do. In the newest Marvel movie, there's a villain who I think is the coolest looking villain they've ever come out with. He's amazing. And he comes out and it's, say he, well, I can't say that. Spoiler alert. Anyways, the villain comes out and you're just like, whoa. Like its power like pulls a sword out of his back out of nothing and all this crazy stuff and just kind of blows your mind and you're like, wow, this guy is awesome. And that's how you're supposed to read these verses. It's supposed to have that same impact on you. That the Son of Man is pictured as this powerful, strong, and if there's only one area that we would go, hey, this is the obvious thing, it is the sword out of his mouth, right? I think that's very easy to see. That this is the Savior who comes, and his weapon is his word. And that ties back to so many passages Sharper, the word is sharper than a two-edged sword. I don't think there's any doubt that John incorporates that two-edged sword kind of idea into this picture intentionally coming out of his mouth, because that is a common image. And so we will see where there's common images. But like if you're trying to figure out what white means specifically, that can mean a lot of things. Like, sure, white normally means purity, but white can also mean that you're the good guy. And, white has other ramifications. I don't think that's our purpose here. Our purpose here is to stand back and to see this powerful image. Now, so think about that. Here's the question. Do you think that picture of Jesus encourages these people? See a lot of head shaking, yes. Somebody tell me why. Raise your hand. Let's get you a mic so you can tell us why. And a couple of you can say it. It's fine to have more than one person. Why, if you're one of the people in the 7 churches of Asia hearing this letter read, why does this image help you out at all? Okay, Joe's willing and Chuck's willing. So let's get both of them. Okay. Joe?
Because he's bigger than Rome, and that's the cause of their suffering, and cause of their current and future suffering, and just the fact that the Caesar is so big in everybody's mind. But now here's someone, and he goes on to say, and they would get this, he's coming in the clouds. Clouds means judgment.
Right.
It meant judgment in Noah's day. It means judgment.
Day of
At
the
this
Lord
point,
coming in the clouds.
Right.
A lot of repetitive prophetic language meaning judgment.
so that would encourage them, say, okay, this battle is not as big as it looks. The Lord's got it.
Okay. Chuck?
Well, the imagery about the two-edged sword,
Okay.
and then the white, like a two-edged sword, cuts both ways. It's not one directional.
Right.
And white is highly visible. There's no hiding anymore.
Doors are hiding the fiery eyes.
Yeah.
And the bronze armor or bronze feet is going to reflect.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things about this is when you put the images together, it is a very bright image. There's a very bright image of hope. Okay, all the things described reflect. And look, there's a part of this where it's just this simple, okay? And I'll illustrate this way. If you're playing pickup basketball and this guy's one of the guys to choose from, he's your first pick, right? It's just that simple sometimes. And I think we're afraid to be that simplistic about this. But you read this description, you're like, I want that guy on my team, no matter what. That's supposed to do that, by the way. It's supposed to kind of give you those kinds of emotions. Now, we're going to dive into a subset about this special style for a minute that we've kind of referenced, and we're going to get into this a little bit more because it's important to give this foundation now. And that is the issue of numbers. There's a lot of numbers in Revelation, and the reason for that is because it's a special style, it uses symbology a lot, and one of the things that is heavily included in that is numerology. Numerology played a huge role throughout the Hebrew Bible, and we know that, but we kind of ignore that. We kind of look at things and we kind of go, 40 shows up a lot. Why? I don't know. Right? Or we look at it and we go, well, there's 12s. What's all the 12s? Why were there 12 apostles? I mean, I get there's 12 tribes, but why are there 12 apostles? And well, 7. Why is there 7 all the time? Or what about 3? And all those kind of things. So what are some of the numbers? I've given you most of them. What are some numbers that you've seen in Revelation repeated? What are some of those numbers? A lot of sevens. Okay. This wasn't a question, by the way, so this is just off the top of your head. What are some other famous numbers in Revelation? Times and a half times, which is not really a number. I mean, I'm not going to define, we're not going to get into that as much. We will eventually, but numbers, specific numbers, is what I'm asking. Oh, there it is, right? It took y'all that long to get to the mark of the beast, 666. And come on, that's the first one. We've talked about that for 2 classes. Any other numbers? Yeah, big number, 144,000. And boy, there's some groups that really latch on to that if they knocked on your door. You ever had that before? Right? I mean, The whole explanation as to why that there will be a new heavens and new earth by some groups is that heaven's full. It's at capacity at 144,000. I'm not making that up. Okay? And that's based on this book. Here's the thing. Let me give you a guideline for reading a book like Revelation. You cannot take small sections of this book and make them literal and use other sections as figurative. It's figurative. Now, I don't believe the letters in chapters 2 and 3 are figurative, although there's debate about how specific they may be. And I think there's some value to that. But when we get into the symbols and the imagery, it's all figurative, including the numbers. Those are symbols. And it's important to understand that. The number 7 is used 55 times in the book of Revelation. You think that's important? It should stick out to us when you think about it. So, here's some numbers that are important that you're going to see. 3 refers to the divine. Why does 3 refer to the divine, or to what is divine? The Trinity, right? Father, Son, and Spirit. There's 3. Simple. 4, and I can't explain this really to you as much as just to say this. Over the years, 4 became a number that refers to creation or to the world. That's just what became, like some of these other numbers. The next 2 are important. 6 is failure. Why? 7 is perfection. 6 is just sort of perfection, which is failure. Now, let's stop there and let's just think about 666. If this is about numerology, what does 666 mean?
Perfect failure.
No. Divine failure. So what you see in this story, you're going to see, and essentially, this is a spoiler alert too, but later on we're going to see there's 2 sides to a battle. One side wears this number 666. One side is divine failure, and the other side, the other army, wears the image of the Son, which is divine perfection. This story is about you getting to choose whether you're going to spiritually fail or spiritually succeed. What is 666? It's divine failure. That's all the mark means. And it's this kind of thing where we sit there and we scratch our heads like, why this number? But when you get this background, it goes, oh, well, that makes sense. Go on. 7's perfection. 10 is completion and power. 12, God's people. What's 144,000? 12 squared times what? 10 to the 3rd power. Ooh, you didn't know you were going to need algebra. See, the teacher told you there would be a day later on in your life where algebra would come in handy. And little did you know that it was going to be in reading the book of Revelation, because 12 times 12, if 12 is God's people, you have 12 times 12, you have what? Both covenants. And then 10 to the 3rd power, divine completion. God's going to perfectly, divinely complete His people. That number just refers to the complete number, not specifically, but the complete collection of all of God's people that He divinely holds in His hand. Not a literal number, but it has a powerful meaning. Do you see why numbers are so important? But you cannot read them literally. That's the key to all of this. And so you'll see those combinations, like times, time and a half, 3.5. What is 3.5? Half of 7. We're halfway there. So these are the ideas. Does that make sense to everybody when you dive into that? Okay? And so when we go forward, we'll refer back to some of this. And there'll be questions, well, what does this mean? Or what does that mean? So, for instance, when you see 7 seals, it's the perfect story that's being revealed through the seals. When you see 7 bowls being poured out, it's perfect judgment. So you see these things, you're supposed to read that into the numbers. That should come to your mind. Any questions about any of that? Okay. So every time we come together, we're going to talk about special style. That's number 1. Revelation has a special style. Number 2, Revelation has a time frame. It has a time frame. Terry mentioned this earlier, and we talked about this Wednesday night. Chapter 1 says these things will soon take place and the time is near. At the end of the book, in chapters 21 and 22, we see these things will soon take place and the time frame is near. So you have these bookends of the book telling you soon and near, soon and near. That's the message of the book. So how would you answer those who believe we're still waiting for Revelation to be fulfilled? And let me say, here's the argumentation, because what 2 Peter 3:8 say? You may remember, that's an important time passage, because a day to God is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. And so, you read that, and you go, well, yeah, Terry, it's been 2,000 years since this book was written, but that's just 2 days to God. How do you answer that? Oh, okay, Brandon?
Well, God wasn't talking to himself when he wrote this book. He was talking to the people where they would understand that, hey, it's going to happen soon. He wasn't telling himself it was going to happen in 2 days.
Correct. This book is written to a group of people, and it has a purpose. We're going to get to the purpose in a minute. But God's not writing this about his time frame. He's writing it about their time frame. Now, if I tell you, hey, Duane made some lasagna, and I'll drop it off at your house soon, and you wait 2,000 years for me to come by, does that seem odd? And by the way, in apocalyptic literature, this idea of soon was used, and it was always expected by the readers to mean in this lifetime. In this lifetime. And that has to do with the reasons for why these books were written. So it's important to understand in this context, God is writing this book, and he is referring to, in the expectations, our time. The point of 2 Peter 3:8, by the way, is not that God has a different time scale than us. It's that he doesn't have a time scale at all. That's the point. It's not that you could do some algebraic equation and divide the dispensations in the number of days, and then, hey, at the end of 7 days, which is 7,000 years, oh, by the way, that's why so many that there's 4,000 or 2,000, like, we've only got 1,000 years left. There's some that believe that stuff. That's not the point of 2 Peter 3 and verse 8. God is not bound by time. He's not bound by it at all. And so we have to kind of keep that in mind. So Revelation has a specific time frame. Questions about that? Any questions? Comments? So that will be number 2, right? Special time frame. So what's the first one? Revelation has a special style, and it has a time frame. Number 3, Revelation has a specific audience. One of the things that was mentioned earlier is that it does say this is written to the 7 churches of Asia. So verse 4, John to the 7 churches of Asia, or that are in Asia. Verse 11, saying, write what you see in a book, send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. And if there's any doubt, he goes on in chapters 2 and 3 to give like specific letters in the context of this vision book that go to these 7 different churches. Why is that important? Why is it important to understand this is written to the 7 churches of Asia? Hint, the answer is already on the screen. It has to be understood in their context, not ours. Now, I'm not saying it's not possible that Revelation could have a double meaning. I don't think it's likely. I think we can see, and we've talked about this, how the story and the cycle of Revelation can historically be adapted to a lot of situations throughout time. But it wasn't written to these people to help them deal with what we're dealing with today. It was written to those people to help them deal with what they were dealing with at the time. And that's really important. It's important whenever you study the Bible to talk about context. But here's the thing when it comes to us in context. When we think about context, what we think about with context is reading the 5 verses before and after of the verse we're reading to make sure we don't take it out of scriptural context. But is there not more to context than just reading the surrounding verses? Sure. Like reading context when you read the Bible includes understanding the audience and the purpose of why it's being written. Look, there are 4 Gospels, and one of the great disservices I think we did at one time to the 4 Gospels is we completely ignored any way, shape, or form that they were different, and we smashed a study of them into the harmony of the Gospels and acted like what this is really about, therefore, was just to make sure we got all the events covered. Like we were putting 4 eyewitnesses on the stand, and 4 guys saw it a different way, or some of them actually were third-hand witnesses, and we just wanted to make sure that in these 4 writings we get all the details. No, I mean, that's a benefit, but that's not it. They were written for specifically different purposes. And understanding that Matthew, for instance, is writing and saying he's a king. He's a prophesied king, and you should see him as a king, and that is different than the way John writes his book, or Mark, or Luke. Understanding their purpose helps you understand the context of the book. For instance, Matthew refers to the Hebrew prophecies a lot more. Why? He's trying to convince the Jews, this is your king. He's your king. You've rejected him, but he is the one. Serve him as king. And so you have those different things that come out in the studies of the context of Scripture. And so when we think about this book, we have to think about these 7 churches and what that may mean to them and the issues they're facing. Which leads us to the 4th and final thing, which we'll talk a little bit more about, which is that it has a specific background. Here's where I am going to get into choosing a date just for the sake of this discussion. Because this is where whichever date you take, whether it's an early or late date, this is where that will impact the way you see this. But here's the truth before I get into this. Regardless of which date you choose, there's still a background attached to that date. With the early date, it has to do with Jerusalem. It has to do with more the Jewish economy and the impending destruction of the Jewish economy. Okay? If you take a late date, it has more to do with the Roman Empire and the things that are going on there. One of the things that is agreed upon is that following the fire in 64 AD, Nero began to target Christians as a scapegoat. And they become an enemy of Rome. Also remember that Rome is considered essentially just to be a sect of Judaism from the perspective of the Roman Empire. And so you kind of have this issue going forward that the Roman Empire now has finally, up until about 64 AD, by the way, Rome's kind of ignored Christianity. It's the Jews that have been after the Christians. The persecution shifts. And that gets us to this date. And Joe's mentioned this, and I think it's really important to understand kind of this background. Let me first share with you some evidence, at least from my standpoint, as to why I would choose the late date, both some internal and external. The external evidence is a couple of things. First, Irenaeus, who was about AD 180, was a student of Polycarp, who was a student of John. So spiritually, think about John's spiritual grandson and the way that Paul would view Timothy's student as his spiritual grandson. And he wrote that the apocalyptic visions were seen not very long ago, almost in our own generation at the close of the reign of Domitian. So you have in this, and I could illustrate it even better, I trained with a guy named Wilson Adams. His son Luke Adams trained with me, kind of this weird thing. You have almost, in my picture, Luke saying, hey, well, Wilson said this at this time. And that's the idea here. You have Irenaeus saying, John got this revelation at the end of Domitian's reign. Clement of Alexandria, who was about 155 to 215, says that John returned from the Isle of Patmos after the tyrant was dead. And Eusebius identifies the tyrant as Domitian. And so we have this external historical evidence that puts John at the Isle of Patmos in the reign of Domitian, and it says this is when it is. As far as internal evidence, John is exiled to Patmos. Domitian was known. He was historically known for this type of persecution. Nero was not, by the way. Nero was known for just executing people. So Paul, Peter both are rumored to be executed by Nero. That's how Nero approached it. Didn't like you, he just murdered you. But Domitian would punish you by exiling you away from everybody. So that doesn't make sense if it's early. The spiritual conditions of the church also seem to point to a later date. For instance, in AD 60, Laodicea was destroyed through an earthquake. But in Revelation, they have great wealth. Well, an early date is usually in that mid-60s range, okay, 64, 65 in that area. And it's very unlikely to view Laodicea as a wealthy place that soon after an earthquake. But 36 years later, that's not unbelievable. Paul commended the Ephesian brethren for their love in Ephesians 1, which is written in the letter to them at Ephesus in Ephesians 1 there. But by Revelation, when we have the letter written to the church at Ephesus, they have left that love. So how long did that take? It seems it would have taken longer. More than about roughly 7 or 8 years, by the way, distance between the two. The Nicolaitans, in chapter 2 are a full-fledged sect, but they are only hinted at in generalities in other scriptures in 2 Peter and Jude, which date themselves around AD 60s, mid to late 60s. So they're only hinted there, but by the time we get to this writing, they're a full-blown sect, which means there seems to be more time between the two things. So those are just a couple of things that seem to point towards this time period. And if that's true, and that's the view we're going to take, okay, just to explain the book, because you have to pick one. The overall message is still the same. But if that's true, what we see here is that Domitian is an emperor, and Joe's referenced this, who simply has insisted that he is viewed as God. Emperor worship, you got to understand that with the emperors, with Caesars, there was always this idea of being divine, but Domitian ramped that up to a whole different level. He took it to kind of the same level you could say as Nebuchadnezzar when he has the image and wants everybody to bow down to it. It's very similar to that. So Domitian is expecting to be worshipped as a god. Well, as you can imagine, that causes problems not just for Christians, but any Jews, really. But specifically for Christians. And Christians become the ones who are refusing to do so. The Jews are just kind of hiding. They're not taking a strong stand. But the Christians are not giving in. They are refusing. And what happens is there's kind of this systematic approach we see where they are first arrested and then they're jailed and then their property's taken, and it's made impossible. Even when they're released from jail, they have no property. They can't buy or trade. That's hinted in the Black Horse with the Scales and the difficulty in the economic dealings when you are viewed this way. And eventually, you're put to death if you don't stop professing your faith in Jesus and start worshiping Domitian. And so that is the background of when this book is written to these people. Now, why is that so important, by the way? Does that change the way you read the book? It should. So when you see these things, and here's where I think we got to get to. We've seen the videos last Wednesday. I think it was Wednesday night. We watched the video and all the craziness and how you interpret it. So one of the problems with people still interpreting Revelation is they're interpreting Revelation on our time frame. So they read about a horse with economic hardship, and they go and look at the stock market, and they look at the unemployment ratings, and they try to find a time in our time frame that it looks like the economy is terrible, and oh, here's the moment that we see the black horse. That's not what's going on here. What we have to do is we have to look at this background of these people and go, what is there? And what you see is in the time period of Domitian, there is economic hardship that certainly fits what is said and what is described by that black horse with the scales. And so then you look at that differently. You're not looking for some modern day revelation. You're looking and going, oh, that's what this means. And so we get to the fifth seal, and there's a bunch of martyrs under the altar. You're not looking to the newspaper today to find, Christian missionaries who are killed in the Middle East. But instead what you're looking at is there's a lot of people who died simply because they didn't serve Domitian. They were put to death for their faith. So you have to read the book with all of that background, not your own. And that changes how you read the book. So you go back to chapter 1 where we started. If you're a Christian who either you or someone in your family has already been arrested, been put in jail, maybe you can't even buy enough wheat to make bread for a day. Maybe you've lost family members, and you see this opening image of this powerful God, Savior, with eyes of fire, feet that reflect like bronze, a two-edged sword that comes out of his mouth. Does it give you hope? Because this is the guy that's coming. And as Joe talked about, that picture is supposed to feel bigger and more powerful and stronger than Domitian. You know how we read the plagues and we see how they attack the gods of Egypt? You ever seen that? That vision in chapter 1 is attacking the claimed deity of Domitian. Jesus comes and hears this image to say, no, you're not big, you're not stronger than I am. And these people could cling to that and go, we're going to win. We're going to win. And you know what he does right after that, by the way? He goes from giving them that hope, these 7 churches, to then going and writing to them and saying, if you want to win, here's some things you got to fix. Like to Ephesus, you left your first love. You're going to have to go find your first love again. And then after he does that, after that introductory vision, and then goes and kind of tells them what they need to work on, then we come back at the end of that and he gets into this powerful story and talks about how God always wins. So we have 4 things. Those 4 things are that Revelation has a special style, a time frame, a specific audience, and a special background. We will go over those things, not just repeating them, but we will go over and review them every class from here on out. Here's why. If I can get you to remember nothing else about Revelation besides these 4 things, you can have a good discussion about the book with anybody. Okay, Joe has his hand. Give me the mic to Joe real quick. Brandon's right behind you.
The first verse, here's, to me, we may disagree on this, but to me, the 7 churches that he speaks to speaks more to the time frame than the absolute who he's speaking to, because verse 1 says, to his servants. Mm-hmm. And that would include even those who suffer in Palestine, who suffer in Egypt, who suffer in other parts of the empire. for the same reasons that the Christians in Asia Minor would be suffering. So the specific audience is his servants, but it's his servants then, and he uses these seven, the complete number, are the...
Yeah.
Yep. So,
Like I said, that is very possible. I'm not going to say it's wrong. The only thing I struggle with in that, just to be clear, is he goes into a lot of detail of these 7 places that are fitting for these 7 places. If he's using these 7 places as representative, that's fine, but he is speaking to these 7 places. And so what it is it becomes similar to Ephesians and Colossians, that he wrote to Ephesus, but all of us benefit from it. That would be how I would apply that. But I think when and we're going to start next week. It won't be just one lesson per class next, but we'll talk next week and we'll dive into each one of those letters and hopefully we'll see that. I mean, there's a pattern, there's ways it's done, but there's a lot of things that seem to be too specific for that to be figurative, in other words. And I think those letters are direct, but that doesn't mean that the letter wasn't shared and message shared to other people, if that makes sense. So that's where I'm at on that. But great thought. We are just out of time. And look forward to Wednesday night when we dive into the 7 churches and the specific audience and what all that reveals to us. Thanks so much.